hardened her expression. She knew she had to be firm, no matter how much her heart ached at the thought of what lay ahead. That morning, she arrived at school earlier than usual, needing to speak to Miguel before he could take any action that might complicate the situation further. When she found him in the hallway, she could already see in his eyes that he wasn't prepared for what was coming. Miguel, his heart still racing from the intensity of the kiss the night before, hurried toward her with an almost naive hope that the moment marked the beginning of something new between them. He had barely slept, not because of guilt, but because of the exhilaration of discovering a love he hadn't known before. However, the tension in Camilla's expression wiped the hope from his face, replacing it with a profound sadness. He already knew what she was going to say, but refused to believe it. Camilla led him to a more private corner, away from the curious gazes beginning to fill the hallway. Her voice, despite her best efforts, trembled, heavy with emotions she was struggling to contain. She told Miguel, with all the seriousness she could muster, that what had happened the night before was a mistake, a lapse that should never have occurred. Each word cut her deeply, knowing that with every syllable she was destroying whatever hope Miguel still clung to. She explained that they couldn't continue, that it had never been meant to happen, and that he needed to forget her. Camilla begged him not to seek her out, to keep his distance, and to do everything possible to ensure no one ever discovered what had transpired between them. Miguel, stunned, looked at her with a shattered heart. Every word she spoke felt like a knife slicing through his soul. How could he forget? How could he pretend nothing had happened when everything inside him screamed the opposite? What he felt for Camilla wasn't mere attraction, it was something far deeper, something he couldn't even put into words. Yet he knew he had no choice. He saw the despair in her eyes, the fear, and understood that no matter how much he wanted to fight for their love, Camilla had already made her decision. Struggling to contain his emotions, Miguel placed a hand on his chest, trying to steady the pain that consumed him. He wanted to argue, to tell her they could find a way, that their love was stronger than any obstacle. But he knew it was pointless. Camilla was resolute, and no matter how much it destroyed him inside, he knew he had to respect her decision. Through tear-filled eyes and a voice choked with sorrow, he promised her he would step away, that he wouldn't seek her out, that he would honor her wishes. As Camilla walked away, leaving him alone in that cold, silent hallway, Miguel felt as if the ground were collapsing beneath him. His mind spiraled, overwhelmed by the raw sensation of loss that struck him with such brutality it nearly took his breath away. He wanted to run after her, to hold her, to tell her she was wrong, that they deserved a chance. But he knew that doing so would only hurt her more, and the last thing he wanted was to be the source of her pain. In the days that followed, Miguel avoided every place where he knew he might see Camilla. His classes became tormenting reminders, as everything there made him think of her. The scent of her perfume seemed to linger in the air, and every corner of the school brought back painful memories of the moments they had shared. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about her. The ache of being apart was unbearable. But he knew there was nothing more he could do. Camilla, for her part, carried the weight of her decision every time she saw Miguel from a distance. She knew she had done what was right, but the pain in her chest didn't lessen. The love she felt for Miguel remained, unshaken but suppressed. Every day she battled her own emotions, trying to convince herself that she was doing what was best for both of them. Yet deep down, she knew this internal struggle would be long and agonizing. The days at school dragged on, and each one felt like a battle for Camilla as she wrestled with the whirlwind of emotions that had consumed her since she distanced herself from Miguel. She tried to keep her life as normal as possible, focusing on her classes and students, but the shadow of that forbidden kiss still lingered over her. Miguel's presence, even from afar, seemed to fill every corner of the school. and it was impossible not to feel his gaze whenever their paths crossed in the hallways. The pain of not being able to be with him was almost unbearable, but she kept telling herself that her decision was the most sensible one. At least, that's what she repeated to herself every night, falling asleep amidst silent tears. However, life, always unpredictable, started to throw new challenges her way. A new literature teacher, Victor, had recently joined the school. He was charming, confident, and quickly won the favor of everyone around him, including Camila. From the very beginning, Victor showed genuine interest in her. He frequently complimented her, admired her work as a teacher, and, unlike their other colleagues, always seemed to find an excuse to be near her. The way he spoke and the way he looked at her made it clear that his intentions went beyond mere professional friendship. Initially, Camila, still fragile from her recent decision to distance herself from Miguel, paid little attention to Victor's advances. She was emotionally drained, with no energy to even consider the idea of becoming involved with someone. But as days turned into weeks, she began to notice that Victor's presence brought her a certain relief, something she hadn't felt in a long time. He was different. His confidence and maturity gave her a sense of security, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil she felt about Miguel. Miguel, on the other hand, started noticing the changes around him. From a distance, he watched as Victor grew closer and closer to Camila. At first, he tried to brush it off, thinking that maybe he was just being paranoid. After all, he had promised to respect Camila's wish to maintain distance, forcing himself to uphold that promise even though it tore him apart. But Victor's behavior around Camila began to deeply unsettle him. The new teacher seemed to be everywhere, always with a confident smile on his face, always finding a way to be by her side, whether in the teacher's lounge or the hallways. And, to Miguel's despair, Camila didn't just seem to accept this proximity, she seemed to appreciate it. The first signs of rivalry began to surface, subtly but unmistakably. Victor, with his sharp perception, quickly noticed the tension between Miguel and Camila. He saw how Miguel's eyes followed her every move, how his presence became uneasy whenever the three of them were in the same space. This only fueled Victor's desire to win Camila over. To Victor, the young teacher was just an obstacle he believed he could overcome. He saw Miguel as inexperienced and fragile, incapable of facing life's challenges. In Victor's mind, he was the right man for Camila, someone who could offer her stability, security, and above all, maturity. One day, during a break between classes, Victor approached Camila with an unexpected invitation. He suggested they go out for dinner that evening, a gesture that left Camila slightly taken aback. She hesitated for a moment, confused by her own emotions. Part of her felt flattered by Victor's attention, while another part, still tied to her memories of Miguel, was overwhelmed by a crushing guilt for even considering the idea. Before she could respond, she noticed that Miguel, who was nearby, had overheard the invitation. The look on his face was enough for Camila to realize that this simple invitation could ignite dangerous sparks. Miguel felt his chest tighten as he heard Victor invite Camila out. His mind spiraled into a storm of thoughts. He knew he no longer had the right to interfere in Camila's life, but the jealousy and pain were uncontrollable. Every word from Victor's mouth was like a dagger. Every smile he directed at Camila was a blow to Miguel's heart. He knew he needed to stay away, but the idea of seeing Camila in someone else's arms was tearing him apart. From that moment on, Miguel felt increasingly restless. The internal conflict between his promise to respect her decision and his overwhelming desire to fight for her created an emotional storm he didn't know how to handle. Victor, on the other hand, took every opportunity to test Miguel's limits. Discreetly but deliberately, he always made a point of mentioning Camila whenever he knew Miguel was nearby, openly praising her and hinting at a connection between them that, while not yet real, seemed to grow closer to becoming reality. Meanwhile, Camila struggled to navigate this sea of emotions, uncertain of what to feel. She didn't want to hurt Miguel, but was also starting to question whether what she felt for him was merely a fleeting passion or if there was something deeper behind it all. Victor represented a new possibility, a life without so many complications, without the weight of guilt and secrecy. But at the same time, her heart still raced whenever she thought about Miguel. The following days were marked by increasingly tense encounters between Miguel and Victor. Though no words were spoken, the loaded glances exchanged between them made it clear that a rivalry was brewing. Victor, with his confident and occasionally arrogant demeanor, continued to get closer to Camila, while Miguel, still determined to respect her decision, suffered in silence. The school, once a place of routine and certainty, had become a stage for intense emotions, where every action and gesture carried profound consequences. One morning began like any other, but the atmosphere was heavy with an invisible tension that seemed to affect even the air they all breathed. Camila was quieter than usual, something her students quickly noticed. Miguel, sitting at the front of his class, appeared distracted, his thoughts far from the equations he was writing on the board. The physical distance between them was evident, but the weight of unspoken words connected them in an invisible thread, and each minute in the classroom dragged on, carrying with it a growing sense of unease. Camila's decision to distance herself from Miguel had been difficult but necessary. She knew she couldn't continue living under the shadow of guilt and uncertainty, but that decision gnawed at her from within. She tried to focus on her lessons, her students, and her daily responsibilities, but deep down, she felt on the brink of an emotional collapse. Miguel's gaze, always present, always watchful, was something she couldn't ignore, and knowing that he still loved her left her torn between reason and her heart. That morning, everything seemed on the verge of collapsing. Miguel, no longer able to endure the silence, decided he needed answers. All week, he had rehearsed what to say, how to approach Camila without causing a scene, but the words always failed him when he saw her. However, something inside him, perhaps the growing jealousy toward Victor or the sheer weight of his suppressed emotions, pushed him to take an action that would change everything. While the students were focused on a group activity, Miguel, without a second thought, discreetly approached Camila's desk. She was grading papers, her eyes fixed on the pages, trying in vain to concentrate. When Miguel stopped in front of her, her heart raced, and for a brief moment, she wished he would walk away, that he wouldn't confront her. But Miguel's gaze carried an intensity she couldn't ignore. Miguel softly said her name, and Camila, feeling her stomach churn, slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. The look on his face was one of pain, mixed with a sense of urgency she knew all too well. He didn't need to say anything. She already knew what he wanted, knew he was searching for an explanation, for answers she wasn't ready to give. But before she could stop him, Miguel, impatient and overwhelmed by his emotions, quietly but firmly asked, "Why are you doing this? Why are you pushing me away?" Camila felt the air leave her lungs. Miguel's words hit her like a punch, and she knew this conversation was heading into dangerous territory. Trying to stay calm, she whispered, "Miguel, this isn't the place. Please, not here." But Miguel's face grew more tense, and the frustration he had been holding back for days erupted unexpectedly. "Are you pretending nothing happened? That you don't feel anything for me?" Miguel's voice rose slightly, just enough to draw the attention of a few nearby students, who glanced over curiously but didn't yet understand what was happening. Camila looked around, panic rising within her. Her heart was racing, and she knew that if she didn't end the conversation immediately, things would spiral out of control. "Miguel, please, don't do this," she said, trying to stay composed, though her voice was trembling. But Miguel, blinded by his pain and his desperate need for clarity, made a mistake. "Why are you treating me like this? You can't just pretend there was nothing between us." And that's when the worst happened. Miguel's raised tone and the tension in their conversation began to draw more attention. Whispering spread among the students, and small groups started watching the two teachers with growing curiosity. What had begun as a tense exchange between two adults was quickly turning into a spectacle. Camila, realizing what was happening, felt the ground fall out from beneath her. The situation was slipping out of her hands, and she didn't know how to regain control. Her mind raced with thoughts of her reputation and the impact this scene could have on her career. "Miguel, stop now. Everyone is watching," she whispered desperately, but he had already passed the point of no return. One of the nearby students, Maria, had heard enough to piece together that there was something more than a professional relationship between the two. She quickly exchanged glances with her friends, and within minutes, gossip began to spread around the room. The murmurs traveled like wildfire, and soon all the students were looking at Camila and Miguel, trying to make sense of what was unfolding. Camila stood up abruptly, trying to end the spectacle. "Miguel, we need to talk later. This cannot continue here," she said, her voice almost pleading. She knew that if she didn't take control of the situation, her reputation as a teacher would be ruined. Camila felt a weight lift from her shoulders at having shared her burden, but the reality of their predicament was still terrifying. "But what can we do? If the administration finds out, everything will be ruined," Camila said, the fear evident in her voice. Miguel looked her in the eyes, his determination unwavering. "We need to expose Felipe. He can't blackmail us like this. If he tries, it'll be his actions that get him in trouble," Miguel responded, his voice filled with conviction. Camila hesitated, but the idea of fighting back against Felipe was tempting. The rush of adrenaline from considering that possibility made her feel a little stronger. "You're right, we can't let him win, but we have to be careful," she said, a newfound resolve beginning to grow within her. From that moment on, Camila and Miguel decided they wouldn't be ruled by fear. Felipe's blackmail could only be defeated if they stood together. The love they shared, now stronger than ever, gave them the courage to face the challenge ahead. What had once been a source of anguish was now becoming a call to action, and they were ready to fight for what was right. Camila sat at her desk, her head resting in her hands, staring at the scattered papers in front of her. The walls of San Andres School, which had once been a safe and welcoming place, now felt as though they were closing in on her. Whispers had begun to echo through the classrooms, growing louder and more relentless, like furious waves crashing against the rocks. The discovery of her romance with Miguel had spread like wildfire, turning her world into a living nightmare. The school administration had summoned her for a meeting, and Camila's heart was racing. She knew she was about to face the consequences of a love that had once felt like a beacon of light in the monotony of her daily life. Now that light had turned into a heavy burden. As she walked down the hallway, the students' stares followed her like arrows, filled with curiosity and judgment. With every step, she felt the weight of what was to come pressing down on her shoulders. When she entered the principal's office, Mrs. Beatrice, a stern woman with a piercing gaze, was already waiting. The room was thick with tension. Camila sat down, feeling as though the chair beneath her might swallow her whole. "Camila, you know why you're here," Mrs. Beatrice began, her tone firm. "The rumors about your relationship with Miguel are spreading like wildfire. This isn't just about your image, it's about the integrity of the school." Camila took a deep breath, trying to suppress the anger and frustration bubbling inside her. Mrs. Beatrice, what Miguel and I share is personal. We're just two people in love, and that shouldn't interfere with my work, she replied, her voice as steady as she could manage. But Mrs. Beatrice was unmoved. You must understand that your role as a teacher comes with responsibilities. Relationships between staff are carefully monitored. If this continues, we'll have to consider disciplinary action, she said, her sharp eyes seeming to pierce straight through Camila. Her heart sank. The thought of losing her job, something she had worked so hard to achieve, was almost too much to bear. Camila left the principal's office with her mind spinning. What had once been a passionate relationship was now an unbearable weight. The echoes of Mrs. Beatrice's words haunted her. As she walked out of the school, she saw her colleagues whispering and casting furtive glances her way, like vultures circling their prey. It unsettled her even more. What had happened to her dream of being a respected educator? What had become of her life? The days that followed were a whirlwind. Camila felt increasingly isolated, as if trapped in an invisible cage. Students began to avoid her or make cruel remarks. Social media was rife with rumors and speculation about her relationship with Miguel. She had become not just the talk of the school, but of the entire town. Even her family began questioning her decisions, wondering if the pressure was becoming too much. Her mother, a loving and concerned woman, called her daily, always worried and pleading for her to be cautious. "Camila, you know I only want what's best for you, right? This relationship, is it worth it? You don't want to throw away your career, do you?" her mother asked, her voice filled with concern. Each word only added to Camila's guilt and confusion. The mounting pressure made her question whether she should give up, not just on her job, but on Miguel too. The thought of walking away from him, of leaving behind the love that made her feel alive, tore her apart inside. That night, alone in her room, Camila stared at her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at her. The person who had once been full of dreams and hope now seemed defeated, exhausted. Tears streamed down her face as she thought of Miguel. Of how he made her feel whole, and of how different everything could be if the world around them weren't so hostile. What if I give up? What if I leave it all behind? She thought, the despair suffocating her. Meanwhile, Miguel was also feeling the weight of the situation. He knew Camila was battling storms he couldn't control. Memories of their happy moments together and the passion that bound them filled his mind. But now everything felt threatened. What they shared had become an easy target for those who wanted to see them fall apart. Thinking of Camila, Miguel decided he couldn't let her face this alone. He wanted to protect what they had, even if it meant defying the school's rules and fighting against the injustice imposed on them. The next morning, Miguel found her in a quiet corner of the school, her eyes red from crying. He approached, unsure of what to say, but determined to make her understand she wasn't alone. "Camila, we can't let this break us. What we have is special and worth fighting for," he said, sincerity shining in his eyes. Camila hesitated, her expression revealing the pain she carried. "But what if we lose everything? What if this destroys me?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "No matter what happens, I'll be by your side. We can face this together," Miguel replied, taking her hand. His touch was comforting, and for a brief moment, Camila felt a glimmer of hope piercing through her darkness. Still, the battle was only beginning, and the future remained uncertain. Camila needed to decide what she truly wanted and whether it was worth fighting for her love, her career, and her identity. The atmosphere at San Andres School was tense. Miguel walked through the hallways, his heart pounding with determination. He knew what he was about to do was risky, but the pressure on Camila had become unbearable. The rumors were consuming her, and he couldn't let her face the consequences of their relationship alone. As students whispered and cast disdainful looks his way, Miguel made a decision that could change their lives forever. He stepped into the principal's office, where Mrs. Beatrice sat, her stern demeanor a reminder of the school's rigid rules and traditions. The room, adorned with diplomas and photos of alumni, seemed to amplify the weight of his decision. Across from her, Miguel saw Camila seated, her face pale, her eyes filled with anxiety. The tension between them was palpable, but Miguel felt it was his responsibility to protect the woman he loved. Mrs. Beatrice regarded Miguel with disapproval, as though she could sense his inner turmoil. "What do you have to say, Miguel?" she asked, her voice firm and unyielding. He took a deep breath, each word feeling heavy in his throat. "I'm the one responsible for this. I was the one who approached Camila. I was the one who started this relationship," he admitted, his determination evident. Camila stared at him, shocked and horrified, unsure of what to say. The principal raised an eyebrow, analyzing the courage in his words. "Miguel, you know this is a serious violation of the school's rules. A teacher being involved with a student is something we cannot accept," she said, her tone cold. Miguel nodded, fully aware that his words could lead to severe consequences. Still, he was willing to accept any punishment if it meant Camila wouldn't have to suffer. "I don't care. If anyone should be held accountable, it's me. I don't want Camila to suffer because of me," he insisted, his voice brimming with emotion. But his plea didn't sway Mrs. Beatrice. "You don't understand the gravity of this, Miguel. Your attitude is admirable, but it doesn't change the fact that you've broken the rules. I'm giving you a warning, but if this continues, I'll have to take more severe action," she stated, her icy gaze conveying her resolve. Miguel's heart sank. "So what are you going to do?" he asked, a hint of defiance in his tone. Mrs. Beatrice remained silent for a moment, weighing her options. Finally, with a wave of her hand, she declared, "Unfortunately, I can't let this slide. You're expelled from the school, Miguel." Her words hit Miguel like a punch to the gut. The world around him seemed to spin, and he felt himself crumbling. Expulsion wasn't just a defeat, it was a condemnation of everything he and Camila had built. He looked at her, their eyes meeting in a shared moment of despair, love, and impending loss. "No, this can't be happening," Camila murmured, tears welling in her eyes. Miguel turned to her, desperate to comfort her. "Camila, I did this for you. You don't deserve to go through this because of me," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. Yet the pain of knowing he was being torn away from her consumed him. Mrs. Beatrice, sensing the weight of her decision, tried to soften the blow. "Miguel, you're an excellent student with a bright future ahead. If you step away and reflect on your choices, we might reconsider your situation in the future," she said. But Miguel was already lost in his thoughts. With his head hung low, he left the office, feeling as though the ground had given way beneath him. In the days that followed, Miguel was a whirlwind of emotions. He hadn't just been separated from Camila, he'd lost his chance to complete his studies and pursue his dreams. The entire town seemed to be watching him, and the shame was unbearable. At home, his parents noticed the change in him. "What happened, Miguel? You don't seem like yourself," his father asked, concern evident in his voice. Miguel looked at them, his sadness unmasked. "I was expelled for love," he said, knowing his words couldn't capture the depth of his pain. For Camila, life became a labyrinth of anguish and despair. Without Miguel, the school was a battlefield of judgment and isolation. The stares of her peers shadowed her every move, and loneliness consumed her. At home, she fought back tears, questioning whether it would have been better never to have been involved with Miguel. Conversations with her parents grew strained, each inquiry about her future serving as a painful reminder of what she'd lost. Miguel and Camila found themselves trapped in a cycle of guilt and despair, their lives intertwined by the pain of forbidden love. They wondered if there was a way back, if the passion that had once united them could survive the storm they now faced. But in a world conspiring against them, the hope of a future together seemed to slip further away. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Camila walked slowly toward the park she and Miguel used to visit. The crisp evening breeze felt heavy on her shoulders, as though the world itself bore witness to her sorrow. The sound of dry leaves crunching beneath her feet echoed like a lament, each step drawing her deeper into the sea of tormenting thoughts. Reaching the park, she found a bench where they used to sit together. His absence was a hollow ache in her chest, and tears welled up in her eyes. Here, they had shared laughter, dreams, and promises of a future together, a future that now seemed impossibly distant. With a heavy heart, Camila knew she had to do what she believed was right, even if it meant letting go of the love of her life. Miguel, at home, was battling his own demons. Being expelled from school wasn't just a consequence of his relationship with Camila, it was a blow to his dreams and his sense of self. The disappointed looks from his parents followed him everywhere, making him feel like a stranger in his own house. He tried to focus on studying alone, but the pain of their separation lingered on every page he turned. The memory of Camila haunted him like a shadow, and he missed her every second. Finally, Camila decided it was time to act. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rehearsed the words she would say to Miguel. She knew she had to be firm, but the pain she was about to cause him felt unbearable. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her phone and sent him a message, asking him to meet her at the park. Miguel arrived just minutes later, his face a mixture of hope and apprehension. The sight of her made his heart leap, but the expression on her face quickly made his joy fade. She looked pale, her eyes red and swollen, her demeanor weighed down by a profound sadness. He approached her cautiously, as if every step toward her required all his strength. "Camila, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She hesitated, the pressure in her chest tightening. "Miguel, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. The silence that followed was deafening. They both knew this conversation would change everything. They sat on the bench, and Camila watched the falling leaves around them. I don't know how to say this, but I think we need to end things. It's what's best for both of us," she said, her words cutting through her like a blade. Miguel stared at her, confusion and pain etched across his face. "How can you say that? We can get through this together, Camila. I can't live without you," he pleaded, frustration and despair pouring out. "You don't understand, Miguel. Your education, your dreams, all of it is at risk because of us. I can't be the reason you lose everything. I can't do this to you," she replied, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down her face, and Miguel felt his heart shatter. He wanted to argue, to protest, but the words wouldn't come. "But I love you. Isn't that enough? I'm willing to fight for us, for all of this," Miguel said, his voice shaking with emotion. Camila shook her head, tears falling steadily. "Love isn't enough when our happiness puts everything else at risk. I can't keep doing this," she said, her gaze steady despite the pain. Desperation consumed Miguel. He wanted to hold her, to beg her to stay, but he knew he was losing her. "So this is it? You're really going to walk away from everything?" he asked, his voice breaking. Camila nodded, her heart breaking with every passing moment. "It's the only way for you to move forward. I don't want to be a burden to you." Miguel felt a wave of anguish crash over him. He never imagined their love would end like this, in painful and irrevocable separation. The sadness enveloped him like a heavy shroud, and the thought of life without Camila seemed unbearable. He stood, helplessness overtaking him. "I can't do this, Camila. I can't let you go," he said, but her resolve remained firm. "You'll move on, Miguel. I promise you'll find happiness again, even if it means moving forward without me," Camila said, finding a thread of strength amid the chaos. With that, she stood, and with one last look filled with love and pain, turned and walked away. Miguel stood there frozen, watching her disappear into the distance. Each step she took felt like a blow to his heart. The pain of separation was unbearable, and loneliness wrapped around him like a dark cloud. He knew it was the right thing to do, but the sorrow became his constant companion. The scene faded, but the memory of that painful afternoon would linger in their souls forever. Months passed since Camila and Miguel's painful separation, but for him, each day felt like an eternity. The school, once a place of dreams and hope, had become an emotional battlefield, filled with memories of shared laughter and unfulfilled promises. Miguel threw himself into his studies, but Camila's absence was like a shadow that refused to leave him. He looked for her everywhere, hoping to see her appear with that smile that brightened even the darkest days. The city, once vibrant and full of joy, felt like a desolate wasteland without Camila. The streets they had walked together were soaked with longing, and conversations with friends became hollow echoes. Miguel felt her loss in every moment, and his quest for answers consumed him. He asked everyone he could, followed every hint, but nothing brought results. Camila had simply vanished, and the void she left behind was unbearable. One afternoon, while walking through the park where they used to meet, Miguel saw an old classmate, Fernanda, who greeted him with a sad smile. They began to talk, and Miguel, in his relentless search, didn't hesitate to ask about Camila. Fernanda's expression changed instantly, as if a curtain had been drawn back to reveal a painful truth. "You haven't heard. Camila was fired from the school a few weeks after you were expelled. After that, she just disappeared," Fernanda said, her voice heavy with concern. Those words hit Miguel like a punch to the stomach. Camila's dismissal was devastating, but what had driven her to vanish completely? The thought of her suffering alone, without the support she so desperately needed, tightened his chest. He didn't know where to look, but he couldn't give up on her. Renewed determination spurred him to search for answers, asking everyone who had known Camila and scouring every corner of the city for clues. Weeks turned into months, and Miguel felt like a detective in a noir film, lost in a mystery with no end. His emotional state deteriorated. Hope and anguish intertwined in his mind, making each day a struggle. During one of his searches, an old friend of Camila's, Alejandro, offered to help. They talked about Camila's last days in the city, and Alejandro revealed that she had mentioned a sudden change in her life, but hadn't shared the details. Then, on a dark evening, while wandering aimlessly through the city streets, Miguel spotted a woman in a cafe. Her figure was familiar, and his heart raced as he approached. It was Camila, but she looked different. The sparkle in her eyes was gone, and her face was pale. Miguel hesitated for a moment, but couldn't resist the urgency to know what had happened. "Camila!" he called, and at the sound of his voice, she slowly turned. The shock on her face was clear, but it quickly shifted to something Miguel couldn't quite place. Fear? Sadness? The conversation that followed was laden with bottled-up emotions and unspoken truths. "Miguel, what are you doing here?" Camila asked, her voice trembling. He felt a rush of relief and sorrow at seeing her again, though this wasn't the reunion he had dreamed of. "I've been looking for you. Everyone is worried about you. What happened? Why did you disappear?" Miguel replied, his anguish evident in his words. Camila hesitated, her eyes darting away. "I didn't have a choice, Miguel. Everything got too complicated. I was fired and needed time away," she confessed, her words heavy in the air. But it's not just that, Miguel. There's something you need to know, she added, her voice almost a whisper. Miguel's heart raced once again as he felt a mix of fear and hope. "What is it, Camila? You can tell me. I'm here for you," he said, taking her hands in his, pleading for her to continue. Camila took a deep breath, as if bracing herself to face an immense challenge. "I'm pregnant, Miguel. It's yours." The revelation hit like a bombshell, and the world around Miguel seemed to spin. The news was so unexpected that he could hardly process it. The love he felt for Camila was now intertwined with a surge of responsibility and concern. "What? Are you saying you're pregnant?" he asked, trying to understand. Camila nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't want to put you in a complicated situation, so I decided to leave. I thought it was for the best," she said, her voice breaking. Miguel watched her, his heart breaking for the pain they were both experiencing. The life they had dreamed of together was now taking a new shape, one filled with challenges and uncertainties, but also new possibilities. "Camila, this isn't something you have to face alone. I'll be with you, always," Miguel declared, holding her hands tightly. The intensity of his words resonated between them, and for the first time in months, he felt a spark of hope. The situation was complicated, but the bond they shared was stronger than any obstacle. They had been separated, but now they were reunited and ready to fight for this new chapter in their lives. Miguel drove for hours, his heart pounding with anticipation and anxiety at the thought of finally finding Camila. He had left his hometown, chasing leads that might guide him to her. The memories of their happy moments together were both a balm and a torment, but he couldn't give up. After hearing rumors that she was living in a small town a few hours away, he decided to take the risk. When he finally arrived, Miguel felt like he had stepped into another world. The streets were quiet, lined with pastel-colored houses and blooming gardens. This tranquility starkly contrasted with the storm raging inside him. He didn't know what to expect. The thought of seeing her again, pregnant with his child, made him both nervous and hopeful. After asking a few locals, Miguel found the address where Camila was staying. At the small house, Miguel hesitated, his heart pounding uncontrollably. He stood for a moment, taking in the simple facade, the wilted flowers in the garden, and the slightly parted curtains. This was where Camila had sought refuge, far from judgmental eyes and the problems that had torn them apart. The thought of her facing everything alone filled him with guilt and pain. He climbed the steps to the door and with trembling hands pressed the doorbell. The sound echoed, and Miguel struggled to steady his breathing. Every second felt like an eternity until the door opened slowly, revealing a Camila he barely recognized. She was thinner, her hair unkempt, but her eyes still held the same intensity he remembered. Yet there was a weight on her shoulders, something Miguel could feel even before stepping inside. "Miguel," she said, her voice trembling. The look they shared was a mix of relief, sadness, and a love that had never truly disappeared. Camila stepped back, as if trying to protect herself from the pain of the past, but she couldn't stop the tears streaming down her face. Miguel couldn't resist. He pulled her into a tight embrace, wrapping her in his arms. It was a gesture of love, protection, and an urgency he couldn't ignore. "I've been searching for you. I thought I'd never see you again," Miguel said, his voice choked with emotion. Camila pulled away slightly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. There was so much to explain, so much to confess, but she didn't know where to begin. "I tried to run away from everything, Miguel," she admitted, the words spilling out like a relief. "After you took responsibility for us, I couldn't handle the pressure. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving, to protect you and to protect our child." Miguel's heart clenched. The revelation of her pregnancy now made perfect sense. He remembered the nights when Camila seemed distant, the unfinished conversations, and the fear that lingered in the air before their separation. "You didn't have to face this alone, Camila. I'm here for you, always," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Camila shook her head, still unsure. "But what if I put you in danger again? I didn't know how to face it all. It was easier to leave than to deal with the situation, and the thought of you suffering because of me was unbearable," she said, the pain etched on her face. Miguel couldn't imagine the loneliness Camila had endured in the months since she left. He held her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Camila, I'm not weak. I want to be part of your life and our child's life. Together we can face anything. You don't have to be afraid of me." She said, her voice steady. They stared at each other for a moment, and Miguel felt a wave of love and hope wash over him. This was the reunion he had dreamed of, but it was also a new beginning, a chance to right the wrongs of the past. Miguel pulled Camila closer, and together they began to talk about their dreams, their future, and the baby on the way. The bond between them resurfaced, stronger than before, as unspoken promises turned into plans. Miguel and Camila decided they could no longer live in hiding, consumed by guilt and the pain of their past. After the revelation of Camila's pregnancy and their emotional reunion, the idea of building a life together began to take shape. But the weight of societal expectations and family judgment loomed over them, creating a tense and uncertain reality. In the small town where Camila had taken refuge, whispers of their story were already spreading. Miguel suggested a bold idea, a secret wedding. Though risky, it sparked a glimmer of hope in Camila. It was a chance to affirm their love and commitment, away from prying eyes and harsh criticism. She agreed, her emotions a mix of excitement and apprehension. On the day of the wedding, they met at a small, secluded chapel surrounded by towering trees that filtered the sunlight. Miguel arranged every detail, bringing Camila a bouquet of daisies, her favorite, and coordinating a simple yet intimate ceremony. As the priests spoke, their whispered vows echoed in the air, a promise of a shared future. But even amid the joy of their union, the shadows of uncertainty lingered. Both feared the challenges ahead. Miguel worried about his family's reaction, while Camila braced herself for the judgment of the townspeople. Yet as they stood together, holding hands and exchanging smiles, their love felt unshakable, a light in the storm of doubt. The story ends with interwoven scenes of love and resilience, tension and uncertainty. Despite the challenges, Miguel and Camila face the future together, clinging to the hope that their love is strong enough to endure whatever lies ahead.